This chapter is called Logan 1. One day I asked Uncle Joe what was some of the important events in the history of Newton. Without hesitation, he said, water in pipes, the reservoir for the storage of water, bridges over Bear River, and the agricultural college in Logan. Grandpa and Grandma Larson had not bettered their living conditions when they left the pleasant, green-tempered climate of Denmark for the hot, dry, sun-baked deserts of Utah. But spiritually and intellectually, they had better themselves, and they understood that. They and their ancestors came from a small rural area in Denmark, which had been home to them for generations back. They were literate, but formal schooling ended for them at age 14. The trades, farming, a life at sea, or domestic service for the women would be their future. Grandpa and Grandma, their mothers and sisters, joined the Mormon Church, came to America, and became part of the American dream. When the college was established almost on their doorstep, they gave their 6 children a chance for a college education. We were a second generation of their family. Now there was no hesitation. When we finished school at Newton, there was no hesitation that when we finished school at Newton, that we too must go on with our education. But the how of it was another matter. There were family consultations. Uncle Ren, Uncle Joe, Uncle Hiram, and my parents. We couldn't go any farther when we were in Newton because there were no school buses, there were very few cars, and we had to leave home. I was finally told that Uncle Joe had rented a house on 3rd South in Logan, and that I, with my cousins, would live there together with Aunt Caroline, who was to be our housekeeper caretaker. I knew it would be a financial sacrifice for my parents, as it was a private school, but some way they were providing for my schooling to continue, and that was a great relief. It would even be a problem to get from home to Logan. Uncle Joe had a Model T Ford car, but they were only dirt roads, and the rest of us had horses and buggies. We would take the train, and then decided to stay in Logan all year, except for holidays. As school time drew near, it was a time of excitement as preparations were made to leave home. School would be different, city life would be different, we would live among strangers, so it would be a time of apprehension too. We did have the advantage of family, however. We had all grown up together and with Auntie, so we had a solid, stable home to be the known factor in our new daily life. We were Hazel, Wrestling, who didn't come until after the holidays, Osborne, Vernon, and me, the only one with a different name, until Eula Benson and Merlin Nelson asked to come on board with us. Mama came with me to help me register and get settled. At the college, we were met by Professor A.N. Sorensen, who would help us select my classes. We sat at a little table while he and Mama made the selections while I looked on. They had one elective class to select and talked over a few options, and they finally decided on a drawing class. That was a big mistake. Or was it? The school was actually a junior college, but included 4 years of high school and 8 years of elementary grades. The latter was a laboratory school used for the training of teachers. I loved the campus with its lawns, wide curving cement paths, clusters of pine trees, and the dignified, lovely brick buildings. The library was a big surprise. I had never seen a library before. The room was as large as a gymnasium on the opposite side of the building. Beautiful windows with half circles at the top. On both sides of the room, the book stacks and the librarian's desk went down the west wall. and the rest of the room was taken up with long study tables and chairs. What caught my eye, and often held it when I was in the room, was a sculpture of Diana of the Chase in one corner, and in the center of the room was a large replica of a sculpture of the wrestlers. What a beautiful room. What a beautiful campus. Since this was a church school, a student body filed into the Nibley Hall for a 10-minute devotional each day, and on Friday we met for an hour to hear usually a general authority. I remember George F. Richards, Stephen L. Richards, David O. McKay, James E. Talmadge, and especially I remember B.H. Roberts. My understanding of the gospel matured, and my testimony grew. The hymns of the church that I grew up with took on new meaning with Professor W.O. Robinson and Henry Oddie at the piano. We sang in a much more spirited manner, like a big choir. Mama and Professor Sorensen did quite well in choosing my courses of study, although there were some blind spots. Sewing did come easy, especially when we had to draft our own patterns. Commercially made patterns were still in the future. Professor Robinson's elocution class was okay, as long as I didn't have to perform. Algebra and English were both first class. Algebra was taught by Mr. Porter, who was in the party that came to my home before school started. I enjoyed the new concept of mathematics, but English was my favorite class, and Professor Sorensen was a first-class teacher. I learned to diagram sentences, and I became addicted to Shakespeare, as I caught the enthusiasm of Shakespeare from the professor, who had been to Harvard. He had a slight scorn for what he perceived to be the superficiality of his New England classmates back at Harvard. And he told us how once, when his name came up during the roll call, he would answer with a resounding "here," emphasizing the R, while the rest of the Eastern boys squeaked out "here, here, here, here." My drawing class did nothing to teach me how to draw. I hadn't the talent to start with, but I tried. All was not lost, though, since on Friday we moved from the easels to the classroom, where Miss Bastow told us about the great painters. Even though the illustrations in the textbook were black and white, and most of all, small, a seed was planted, which drew me later to museums of art in New York, in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Denver, as well as our own little Springville Museum, and classes in art history here at the university. There was a flip side to campus life, as I would soon see. I came in late one day to a rally in Nibley Hall, soon after school started. The hall was full of organized noise, led by a boy going through all kinds of body calisthenics. I wondered if he was in his right mind, or if anyone in the room was. It was the same student body that on other days filed into the room to sing hymns and hear prayers. It was worse on another day, when it was announced that on Friday at 1 p.m. Flag Day would be observed. That was fine until the fighting started. When I saw two boys start fighting at the top of the Nibley Hall steps and rode over and over and down those cement steps, with the president standing on top of the stairs, calmly watching, I couldn't understand that, and especially when the crowd gathered round to cheer one or the other. So I went home horrified. The boys told me later that it was all in fun, and that it was a contest between the freshmen and the sophomores to see who could hang the class flag on the top of the pole. I was also afraid of football for a while. Merlin, who lived with us, won a place on the team, and I was sure he was going to be killed or maimed for life. I think the flag days were eventually discontinued, and I learned more about the game of football until I really enjoyed the game. There were a few changes the next year. A wave of the flu in the late winter of our first year closed school in February and took the life of Wrestling, the scholar of our family. He was cut out of a different cloth than the rest of us, and we missed him. The school district added the 9th grade to the elementary schools, which kept Grant and Verda in Newton for another year. This left Vernon and Osborne, Hazel and I, with Aunt Caroline for our second year, and we rented an apartment with the Charles Card home up in the 7th Ward. For me, algebra became geometry, which was even more interesting than algebra. Mrs. Barber taught English, and we read Silas Marner. Ernest Mann wrote a paper of some kind, and the final sentence of it was, "They shot him through the head and killed him dead." Is that being redundant? I met another 5-star teacher in Ayla Drew Jensen, who taught ancient history. I still have the textbook of that class when I was a sophomore in high school. He taught me to love history, but best of all, he spent a good deal of time with the myths of Greece and Rome, which greatly enriched my reading all my life. These 2 years were not entirely free from difficulties. When Aunt Caroline left to come with us, she hesitated to leave the rock home empty for the winter, and asked if we would like to move from our little down home to live up there. They moved after I left home, but this made it harder for Papa to do his chores and farm work, and it ended Mama's dream of ever having a home of her own. It was a drain on the family finances to pay for my schooling, but I am sure they were happy about my experiences. For me, it was pure good fortune. Ayla Drew Jensen would go to the faculty of the University of Utah from teaching 10th grade history. Ann Sartson came from Harvard to teach the 9th grade English and would soon be teaching at a university, I think, in Logan. Almost every teacher I had was a superior teacher and a person with only one exception. He was an upperclassman that had no idea how to teach the Book of Mormon. This was a church school, so everyone had to take a class in theology every year. To summarize what these 2 years have meant to me, I will have to say that the whole experience was not so much a dream come true, it was the dream itself, and the dream would soon be over.